Hello everybody, this is a review of the basics having to do with 2D arrays in Java. So we're going to cover how to declare and create arrays, how to set values and read them, how to loop over all of the elements in row column order, and then how to loop over only edge elements. So declaring always has the same pattern. The pattern is data type bracket bracket. Data type is whatever data type you want the array to be, bracket bracket tells it's a two-dimensional array, then the variable name, so that declares it. Or you could declare it and assign it a value by saying new data type, what's this going to be, height, width, which is the same thing as the number of rows and the number of columns. We will consistently be using the convention that the first index here gives us a row number and the second index gives us a column number. Okay, so what does this look like in practice? If I want an int array, I could say array new int, and I could make it 10 rows by 5 columns. So that's taller than it is wide. A string array would look like this. New string, and then like 6 by 6. If you have other objects declared that are your own objects, like in our adventure game, for example, we have a tile object. So you could make a 2D grid of tiles. We could call it world, and we could make a new tile array that's like 1,000 by 1,000. So that's how you create them. Okay, let's do reading and setting values. So let's pretend that, here I'm just going to keep the first one here, array. So in order to read values, you just treat the array like it's a variable, because it is a variable. So array 0, 0 means look at the 0 row and 0 column, so the upper left-hand corner of this array. So that should print 0 right now because there's nothing inside it. However, I could assign a number to that same location, like this, and so then that would display 10. You should think about this entire thing right there as if it's a single variable, because it is a reference to a single element, which contains a single variable. Alright, another kind of tricky thing to know here is, what if you didn't create the array yourself, so you're not sure how big it is? An easy way to do that is, so if I want the height, that's the number of rows, so I can say array.length, and that will give me the total number of rows. The width is the number of columns, so array 0, this gives me the first entire row of my array, because it's row 0. So this itself is an array that represents a one-dimensional array that represents that top row. So if I ask that how long it is, that's the number of columns. In other words, it's the width. Okay, so the number one thing to be careful about here is the height is not the same thing as the last row index. The last row index is always one less than the total height. So if I tried to say array height 0 equals 10, that would be an array index out of bounds. So I need to say height minus 1. If you feel like you're going to get confused about this at all, especially in a free response question, a great thing to do is to just declare some variables where you say last row is array.length minus 1, and last column is array 0.length minus 1. And then in your later code, whenever you need to use them, you could just say like array last row last column equals something. So this would assign 99 to the lower right-hand corner of my array. Alright, let's do looping over all the elements. So normally in for loops, we'd use indexes like I and j. When I'm looping over arrays, I like to use the indices r and c for row and column. So I'm going to loop over rows first, starting at row 0. Row must be less than the total length, so array.length r++. And then for every single row, I'm going to loop over all of the columns. So int c equals 0, c is less than array 0.length, c++. This is such a common pattern, I can't emphasize it enough. This should just come to you immediately. You shouldn't have to think about this at all. If it's a little bit confusing, again, about the array.length, array 0.length, if you've created last row and last column, it might make more sense like this. Row starts out at 0, and it's going to continue to iterate as long as it's less than or equal to the last row. And the column's going to keep going as long as it's less than or equal to the last column. this makes a good deal of intuitive sense. The only thing not to do is to mix those two approaches together. So notice here that I'm going up to and including the last row. However, where I came from was I've got to be less than array.length, because array.length is 1 past the last valid row. So that's why if r is smaller than that, the largest thing that it's going to become is array.length minus 1, which was the last row. So pick whatever method appeals you to the most, just don't mix them together. Alright, so now if I want to do something to every element, I could say array row column equals 10. So that would like fill the whole array with 10s. Alright, let's talk about how to loop over edges only. So let's say I wanted to loop over like the very bottom of my grid. So think about, if I'm looping over the bottom, I've got rows and columns. One of those two things is changing, and one of those two things is staying the same. So think about what's changing, what's staying the same. The thing that all of the bottom elements have in common is they have the same row, because they're the bottom row. The thing that's changing is the column. So what that means is my for loop has got to loop over all of the columns. So I'm going to start at the leftmost column. I'm going to go less than or equal to the last column. And now I don't need another for loop, because the column is the only thing that's changing. So now I can just say array for some row at my changing column equals 10. So this is going to put 10s all along the bottom. Okay, what row? Oh, it's the last row. So notice this is not changing, this is just a constant. This one is changing inside the for loop. We could do the same thing for the top row. If I wanted to loop over the top row, again, column is the thing that's changing. So column is less than or equal to last column. And then now I want row 0 and column C equals 10. Okay, one thing you might notice is that these two loops are exactly the same. Like the C values are ranging over the same elements. So instead of having a whole loop where I loop all the way over the bottom and then another one where I loop all the way over the top, I could do both of these inside the same loop. I'm looping over all of the possible columns, and for every single possible column, first I set the bottom row number, and then in that same column I set the top row number. I think that covers our basic review. I hope it's been helpful. Good luck on the